So yeah, good afternoon, Christine. Thank you for coming along today.
Thank you for inviting me along, Howard. I'm really, really excited to be here. It's lovely to have the opportunity to meet so many entrepreneurs.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you once again. And so just going for that is you come talk to us today about Little Kickers. Is that right? And can you tell us a bit about Little Kickers?
Sure. Little Kickers, we run educational football programs for really young kids, so kids age 18 months to 7th birthday. And we operate in 32 countries around the world through a network of about 330 franchisees. And the company was founded in the UK back in 2002.
Okay, brilliant. So really you've been going, so you're coming up to the 20th birthday. Congratulations, you're doing so much better than other businesses. So how does that feel hearing coming up to the 20th birthday?
It makes me feel really old, old and tired. No, it's good. I'm still really enjoying it, which is kind of a positive thing. And I think what's been nice about it is that I set it up because I wanted to be able to operate on my own terms and run a business on my own terms. And it's enabled me to do that. And I think the thing that I found with it is it's never boring. Like, every day there's something new I've got to try and sort out. And I'm constantly learning new things. So for me, I absolutely love it still. It's really fun business.
So that's it. You've managed to love it for those 20 years. But going back, you say you kind of wanted to have that own control. Where did that come from, and where did it Little Kickers get reborn out of?
Yeah, so basically the reason I set it up, because I was at Aston, I studied international business and modern languages, and I graduated in 1993, so probably before a lot of people on this call were actually born, but graduated in 1993, and I went to work for JP Morgan when I graduated on their graduate scheme. Really long hours, and I had to do a lot of traveling and things like that. And so I decided after I had my first child that I would try and change careers. Well, not really change careers, but change companies. So I decided that I would move to Enron because they seemed like a pretty kind of safe bet. They said that they would let me work part-time eventually, which I was really excited about because I'd barely seen my son for the first 2 years of his life. So off I went to Enron, and I literally joined the company 3 months before it went bankrupt. And obviously it was the biggest ever corporate bankruptcy in the world. And I joined there as a risk manager. So at that point I was like, oh, my options maybe are getting a little bit limited. So I decided that I wanted to take a bit of time out. I'd kind of joined because I wanted to go part-time, but they put me onto the European Risk Committee, and I had to be in meetings in the office in London 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. every day. So I didn't see my son at all for the entire 3 months I was there. So I decided to have a little bit of a career break. And I got to spend all this time with Lucas, my son, when he was 2, and I discovered that he absolutely loved football. So every day we would like pop off down to Wandsworth Common in London, and I'd stand in goal and he'd kick balls past me. And when I was growing up, football wasn't really considered to be a girl's sport, so I never got taught how to play it or anything, and I was pretty useless. So I thought, well, actually it might be quite good if I could find somebody who could teach him, because he was really excited about it. And I looked into classes, and there wasn't really any sports classes at all for kids under the age of about 6 years old at the time. And so I thought, well, why don't I set something up for him and some of his little friends at their nursery school? So I did that, but it was never really meant to be, something that I would do as a career. But the pilot that I set up got oversubscribed by about 400%. So I was like, wow, there actually must be a bit of demand for this. So I decided at the end of the pilot to try and expand it more broadly. And I realized that at the time, probably there were going to be quite a few people trying to set up in competition with me because the barriers to entry were pretty much non-existent. I knew next to nothing about football. I'd set it up with zero money practically. I mean, I'd registered the domain name. I think I had about £250 that I'd invested into it when I set it up, printed out some flyers, got a friend to kind of cobble together a logo. All the photos on the flyers were my son and his friends. And I just went around and handed out flyers, put up posters in play parks and things like that, and drummed up demand. And I tried to set up classes in the areas of London where I thought the biggest competitors were likely to pop up. So, the areas where there was a similar demographic to mine. And actually, after a while, I realized that it was the areas where there were lots of Starbucks, because at the time it was quite a new thing in the market, and it just seemed like wherever there was a Starbucks, that seemed to be the demographic I was looking for. So I was like, right, wherever there's a Starbucks, I'll set up a class. And it kind of grew from there, really.
So really that put that personal touch, and Enron 3 months before Enron goes to us, risk management possibly not the greatest, but that seeing that opportunity. So it was born out of your own. Was it kind of frustration, or just you saw the opportunity there?
It was really, and I think so many of my friends actually who run their own businesses, it's a similar thing. You see a need, and you decide that you want to satisfy that need, and you kind of assume that if you see that need, other people probably do, and they probably need it too. So I just thought, well, I'll test it and see if other people want this too, and it turned out quite a lot of people did.
So how was that first time of really gauging if people wanted it? Because that's always sometimes the scary moment. Did you speak to people beforehand, or were you just like, I'm going guns blazing here?
I did a bit of research. So I looked into what other classes were available for kids of my son's age. And weirdly, there was music classes were available and ballet. And lots of my friends were thinking about signing their boys up for ballet. And I just thought, I don't think that's going to be Lucas's thing. I think he just really likes football. So that was kind of why I went down that route. But there weren't many classes at that time for kids at that age, to be honest. So I researched what else was out there. And then I asked a bunch of friends, and people when I was handing out flyers, is this something you might be interested in? When I did the pilot class, I deliberately asked none of my friends to come along with their kids, because I wanted to make sure that actually the people who came along were genuinely interested and that they would pay, because obviously I didn't want something where just all my friends turned up because they felt sorry for me. Didn't think that'd be a viable business. But yeah, so that was the kind of research I did into it, and then it just went crazy with demand from all over London. Really, people heard about it and just started contacting me.
So that's a really interesting idea, that no friends kind of like boxing off and burying. So how was that? Like, was that, why did you see that and kind of make sure you want to validate the people that were there? Where did that idea come from?
Well, because I think most friends would be supportive of a friend who is planning on setting up their own business, and you don't really get a very honest opinion, I don't think, of whether your idea is a good idea and is generally going to be applicable to a broader audience. If you're just asking your friends to, of course they're going to be nice and they're going to give you positive feedback, but I didn't know if they were going to be a kind of sustainable market for me, just my friends. So yeah, that was why I did that.
Brilliant. And then going away from that, 400% the pilot got oversubscribed, so dealing with that, but also just going away, the idea of expansion, you said, I started looking at areas of where I thought competitors would pop up. Is kind of like wanting to crush the market immediately, or like how did you start building that out kind of and really going from there?
Yeah, well, at the time when I set it up, as I said, I only put kind of £250 roughly, something like that, into setting it up. So registering the domain, I didn't even register the limited company or anything like that, which, at that point it was too early a stage for that, I felt, but I did it soon after. As I know you've been studying that, haven't you, today? So registered the domain, got a friend to put together a logo, printed some flyers, just went out and walked around handing them out, pushing Lucas in his pushchair, chatting to people who had kids in pushchairs as well, putting up posters in play parks, just chatting to anyone I could. And so, I think because I didn't have a huge amount of money to set it up, and I didn't really want to try and kind of get loans or anything at that point, I just wanted to see if it would work. But I realized that because it was cheap for me to set it up, and I didn't really know a whole lot about football at that time, I'd managed to luckily find a coach who seemed to he knew what he was doing. He had his FA qualifications, which were okay for what we were looking at. But to be honest, it was, for teaching a 2-year-old, it's quite different from teaching, the kids that the FA qualification is designed for, which is a lot older kids. But yeah, I realized that if I'd set it up and it'd been quite easy for me to set up, probably other people would see what I was doing and think, actually, why don't I set something similar up? So I just thought, right, I'm just going to try and corner the market in London and stop other people from doing that. So I think the first classes we ran probably weren't the best in terms of quality, because I was doing some of the coaching and I had no idea really what I was doing. I wasn't the lead coach, I was the assistant, but and we didn't really realize that a typical football coaching designed for kids age 6+, which is what the FA qualification is designed for, doesn't really work for a toddler. I mean, we kind of realized it after a while, but we were trying to make them do grid work and things like that. And these poor little kids were just like looking at us like, what are you doing? So I realized quite quickly I needed to kind of do a blend of preschool kind of early learning concepts, so colors, numbers, socialization, parts of the body and things like that, and football as well. And so I hired a nursery school teacher, and she made the program a little bit more kind of, you know, young kid friendly. But the original idea was just try and get it out across as much as London as I could. And I think that idea of, you know, until we'd built up some barriers to entry, I wanted to make sure that I'd cornered the market in as many places as I could where I thought there was a good kind of viable market. And that's kind of stayed with the business, I think, you know, right till today, really.
So those initial stages, you were going out, handing out the flyers, seeing some of the push air, like you're my ideal. How did you then start to build that demographic? Because that, you're saying cornering the market, and I started to really go to these areas. How did you start building that up, and how did it progress from seeing a pushchair, you're my person, to right, okay, this is where I need to build this customer, this market, and understanding of the demographic?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we were, I mean, I'm very fortunate insofar as we sorted out our quality issues kind of early-ish on. So I knew that the quality had improved. And I think there was nothing else out there really like this. There was a lot of interest. And I think in those days, parents, and still now, parents chat to other parents and recommend things. That's like I think something like 70% of the kids who come to our classes come because they've come through word of mouth. Their parents have been told by other parents and things like that. And that's worked really well for the business, I think. And it's still kind of the case now, you know, even with the franchising side of the business at the moment. I think it's like 95% of the franchisees that we sign up are actually either, they've got some link with the business. They could have been coaches, they could have been people who'd come to classes in a different country, or they could be friends of people who come to classes, but there's always a link with the business. So I think a lot of it has grown through word of mouth, even though we do all kind of digital marketing and things like that. But certainly in the early days, it was mainly word of mouth that the business grew through.
So that real strength of the word of mouth. I just love the Starbucks who got, you're like, oh, okay, these people, they're going from building it out. But how was that challenge, or what were the challenges when that first came up? Because you mentioned around quality there, and you kind of being the assistant, going around running and helping. But how quickly did you have to solve those issues, and the issue of potentially the FA coach not maybe being the appropriate, or bringing in the nursery? How long was that life cycle?
It honestly just felt like fighting fires all the time. It felt like we were just lurching from one disaster to another. It was a very tough couple of years. And I think at that point in time, I didn't know if the business was definitely going to work. And I would kind of go back and meet with my friends from banking, and they'd be like, what are you doing? You know nothing about football. Why have you set up this business? Are you mad? Like, come back into banking. But I wanted to give it a go. But it was, I think, to me, that's the hardest point in setting up a business, is when you are constantly, you know, you have a barrage of issues because you're at such an early stage of everything, and it's constant challenges, but then you don't know for sure it's definitely going to take off and work. And so it's fine to like take a few chances when you know you've got a couple of years under your belt and you know that the business is working. But I think that particular initial stage is really, really difficult. Yeah.
So that was working through, and that firefighting, you just didn't want to be it. So it was just kind of dealing with it. There wasn't really a structure to it. But when those kind of stages of doubt crept in, how was it? What was the motivation? Was it more just that drive from the beginning? Because of course now you look back a bit with that 2020 hindsight, but how was it at the time, and kind of those emotions of, I can imagine, were fluctuating quite a lot?
Yeah, I think before I knew that it was definitely going to work, it was really, really tough. And I just thought, actually, I don't want to go back to a kind of corporate job where I'm going to have to be doing long hours and traveling and not see my kids. And by this point, I was kind of, you know, having my second child. And I just really wanted to get something together that I could kind of, you know, mold to suit my life. And so I think that made me quite determined to try and make it work. And I was, you know, to begin with, I was just like, actually, it just needs to be able to get, you know, a turnover of X amount per year, not too much, and then it'll be fine. And, you know, then I don't have to go back to work in a bank. And then kind of over time, obviously, it's kind of grown and grown. And my aspirations for the business have got bigger and bigger. But I think initially it was just like I set myself quite a small goal of what I wanted the business to achieve, and just dug my heels in and just thought, actually, I made the decision I was going to do this, and I was just like, right, nothing is going to stop me from doing this now. I can see that it's going to work, and I'm just going to keep pushing it. And but it's very hard, that point.
So I think the real one there to pick out is, what was that first milestone you kind of put in the ground? Because some people say, I want to make X amount, or was there a specific milestone you like, and you hit that, and that was like, wow, I've actually managed to hit a goal I set, and like now I'm on to the next one?
I think it was when we got to about 35 classes a week, and that was by the end of the first year. I was like, wow, this is actually starting to look like a proper business. And by that point, I realized that the financial model worked, that it was actually, because it was a bit touch and go to begin with. I mean, I had all my spreadsheets and everything, but I was like, you're always a bit nervous about it. But after the first year, I knew that financially it worked, and it was then just a case of trying to spread it out as much as I could, and trying to work out how to do that in a way that would enable me to maintain the quality of what I was doing, and wouldn't get too big too fast, but at the same time would enable me to grow the business quickly enough so that I could get into all those places where people might be thinking of setting up in competition.
So that's really interesting. So that first year was managed to get 35 classes a week, which is fantastic. That's a real goal in the first year. And then you were saying that it took a couple of years actually to get those quality control and firefighting. So how was that? You hit that first milestone, great, okay. Now we're doing a business, we're excited, but then you still had a few tumultuous years. How did that play out, and what were the next milestones that really started to come and land for the business?
I mean, the next thing after that was I'd realised when I got to 35 hours a week that I was actually working almost as long hours as I had been when I worked in a bank. And I was like, that was not the goal. So I decided that I needed to find a business model that would enable me to grow the business. So I looked into, just hiring lots of managers and setting them up in different parts of the UK. And that just seemed like it was going to be quite a difficult thing to do. Then I was approached by a lady from Northwest London rather. And she suggested that I took her on as a franchisee, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. I mean, I'd heard of it, but I didn't know what it was at all. So I just did a lot of Googling, and was like, actually, that could work, and that could be a really good way to expand this business. And the more I kind of dug into franchising, the more I thought, God, it's a business model that enables lots of people to have their own small business, which would suit people who are like me, who've had corporate career and don't like the lack of work-life balance. And I was like, I'm sure there are loads of people out there like me who are in a similar position. And it also enabled me, it would enable me to expand the business whilst maintaining the quality. Because if somebody has their own franchise, if they don't run good quality classes, people aren't going to show up for them, and they're not going to have a very successful business. So that was the point at which I'd started digging into franchising to see if it would be something we should do, and decided to take on a lady in Northwest London as a franchisee, which was quite a bold move because I didn't really know too much about franchising at the time. But I was completely upfront with her, and I said, look, I will do whatever I can to help you make sure that your business is successful. I've managed to set up these 35 classes myself. I will explain to you exactly how to do the same thing in the area that you're in, and I'll give you all the help I can. And so she actually only sold her franchise in December. She was with us she joined us in 2004, so with us for kind of 15 years roughly, and she did really well when she sold a franchise. She kind of got a very good return on it, and it just made me really happy that she'd stayed with us so long. And she was, throughout her life cycle as a franchisee, she was constantly pushing us to improve things and bring the business forward. So it was really great having her as a first franchisee.
I was going to say, because that kind of got that franchisee model that now's gone on, and now you're in 32 countries. That it started off that, and it was one that was given to you more than rather one you went and sought. And how important do you think that is, listening to ideas and maybe changing or pivoting a bit around your idea?
Oh, absolutely critical. I mean, there's so many things that we've over the years, parts of the business that have evolved because of that. Just one example would be, I never thought that Little Kickers would teach languages, but we it's probably about back in 2013 we had an ops manager, and it was a couple who were Brazilian, and they were working for our Northern Beaches franchisee in Sydney, which is kind of the biggest franchisee and was the biggest franchisee in Australia at the time. And they wanted to move back to Brazil and set up Little Kickers in Brazil. But we had that whole like, well, how on earth are Brazilian parents going to be tempted into buying an English/Canadian football franchise? And the only way we could think of the creative USP in Brazil was if we could teach English through the program. But that was certainly never something that we'd even considered before. But actually, we developed the program to teach English, and now we operate that in a bunch of different, like Ecuador, Chile, China. So it's actually kind of really taken off, and it's become quite a popular part of the business now. So there's been quite a few things where I wouldn't have ever have thought of the ideas myself, but things have come along. And quite often it's when you've got a problem, and it's just kind of thinking, right, how can we solve this problem? And then you think, oh my God, it's brilliant. It's actually turned into a massive, opportunity, or really something that I wouldn't have thought of myself, but it takes the business in a slightly different direction, but a really good direction.
So just to counter, so that sounds great, and say seizing those opportunities, but have there ever been ones that you've gone, oh, this is the right pivot, and they haven't worked out? That kind of the other side of the coin. Like, can you tell us about one of those maybe? Too many.
Loads of them. I think for a long time, I kept getting distracted. And I think this is like the entrepreneur's curse. So you see an opportunity and you want to jump on it. But I kept getting distracted by people saying things like, oh, have you thought about doing this for cricket or for dance? And we had this like one thing where the Wiggles in Australia, this like dancing kids show, they contacted us and they wanted to set up a program with, it was just all these things were distracting me. And we actually even went down the route of setting up a rugby program, which actually we ran for about 5 or 6, maybe more years. We literally only shut that down a couple of years ago. And it was it worked okay, but it wasn't brilliant. I think most parents don't really want their 2-year-old to be getting into a violent sport like rugby. We decided after a while, but we had a dance program that was a bit of a disaster. And we set up a program called Olympi Kids, which was a multi-sport program, and then the Olympic Commission threatened to sue us because we'd infringed their trademark with the name. So yeah, there's been loads of stuff that we've done, and I've just thought, you look back on it and think, what on earth were we doing? But I think you've got to keep trying different things to see what works.
So how, that's really interesting, especially on the rugby one. It went for 6 years, but now you look back and go, no, because 6 years, really, like in sales, some businesses don't go past 1-2 years. So for it to become an arm and branch for 6 years is quite successful. But what was the point where the tide just turned, you like, actually, this isn't it? And what was your thinking, kind of, especially those involved and engaged in it, essentially employees or franchisees of that model? How did that come about? And when you decided it was a failure, but how would you kind of introduce or do that amongst your leadership and those impacted?
That's a really, really good question. It was actually one of the more difficult problems we've had. But the reason we realized it wasn't the right thing, I don't know if you've heard of EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Loads of businesses in North America use it, and it's kind of almost like a framework. It's been amazing for our business, actually. The way it works is it gives you a really solid structure within which to run the business. So it has a schedule of weekly meetings, you have quarterly meetings, you set 10-year goals, and then you scale those down to 3-year goals, and then you scale those down to 1-year goals, and then with the 1-year goals, you scale them down to quarterly goals, and then to weekly goals. And everyone on the team has what they call rocks, but it's basically a goal, a series of goals that they have to achieve. You check in every week, check that everyone's achieved them. Every quarter, you meet up, check that they've all been achieved, and then you set the goals for the next quarter. But one of the things, we had a facilitator helping us to go through the whole EOS process. And one of the things he made us do was to take a step back from the business and say, what is our niche and what is our core competence and our core focus. And we realized that kind of, doing things like, selling programs to the Wiggles and doing little ice hockey players and stuff, that was not our niche. The thing that we were known for and that we did a good job of was running preschool football classes. And it actually reminded me, one of our lecturers at Aston, when I was there, the International Business Environment lecturer, he always used to go on and on about sticking to your knitting. And I always kind of thought, what else? He just thought it was a bit crazy. I didn't really understand what he meant. But then all of a sudden that kind of clicked. And I was like, oh my God, that's what he meant, stick to your knitting. And at that point, we all agreed as a team, our focus was going to be just getting the football as big as we possibly could globally, rather than doing any of these other kind of, distracting businesses. But you raised a really good point when you were asking about how did we manage to scale it back? Because obviously the franchisees had bought the program from us. And so it's quite difficult then to stop them from running it, because a lot of them, particularly ones in Australia, they were really passionate about it and they thought it was going really well. And in some areas it did go really well, but the bulk of the areas we're operating in, it was always kind of limping along behind Little Kickers. And then other companies set up in competition doing that. So like Rugby Tots and groups like that. And what we realized was that, yeah, there's some parents who want to take their kids to those kind of classes, but actually, in order to run it as a franchise business, you have to give someone such an enormous franchise to have enough parents in to actually fill a class with 18 kids, or a few classes with 18 kids per class, that poor old coaches spend their entire time driving miles between classes, and it's just not an efficient way of running it. So what we did in the end was just said to the franchisees, look, we wound it down over a few years. We found that naturally the franchisees focused more on the football side of their business, and they were more, it's just much easier to get kids to come to classes. And then after a while, we just said, look, we're not going to support it anymore. You can keep using the name if you want to. We're not going to charge you management fees. You keep running it if you like. And what we found, I think we've only got like 1 or 2 franchises in Australia now who still run it. And that's fine. I'm no issues with them doing that, but it's just not something that we could support, because obviously with a franchise business, the infrastructure is so enormous, the operational infrastructure, that you can't just keep on, having that infrastructure in place and maintaining it for 2 or 3 franchisees.
So how hard was that? Because of course Little Kickers as a whole brand, as a company, built up, and it's often seen as treasured, it's yours. And going back to some of those initial hard decisions of franchising out, someone else suggests it, you're like taking seizing opportunities, but then to really go, oh, I need to leave that. How did you deal with that as a leader and kind of progress and grow? Because you said you got excited, distracted by things. Great, they're shiny things. I love them. So many entrepreneurs say, but how hard was the flip side, the challenge, and like dealing with that and kind of accepting that wasn't the right way?
Yeah, it annoyed me. I think for a long time, I kind of was flogging a dead horse, trying to keep it going. We had all these MBA students from different universities doing like studies on it, and and things like that. And I really wanted it to work because we'd launched it, and I was like, why? I don't know. I'm not very good at kind of giving up on things, and so I was quite sad when we eventually got rid of it, to be honest. But really, I think Little Kickers was taking off so well that it was, where do we want the team to spend their energies? Do we want them to spend it on something that's doing really well and that's got massive potential, or do we want them to spend it on something that we've been kind of, it's almost like trying to push water uphill or something for 6 years with this particular business? So I think it made sense in the end, but it wasn't a nice thing to have to do.
Mm. So going back to then the start of going back to that 2004, that first franchise kicking off and really growing, and especially staying with you for 15 years, is how was that as a relationship? Kind of this alien coming into the business, now giving you a load of ideas, and kind of that still that effect of someone feeding into your business that you hadn't expected. How did you deal with that?
I was scared because I thought she's put her faith in me and I can't let her fail. So I charged her next to nothing for the franchise, and I gave her a really good kind of on the management fees, huge reduction on the management. So she got a really good deal at the end of the day. And I was incredibly grateful to her for taking a chance on me and the business. And I ended up giving her a franchise area that was, because I had no clue how big a franchise area needed to be. So I kind of, over time, I refined it and things like that. But I gave her what ended up being 5 times the size of a normal franchise area. So she sold off 4 of the areas and kept 1 of them. So over the years, she did very well out of the business. And that made me really happy because, you know, she took a massive chance on me in the early days. She basically, everyone who wanted to join the network, or was thinking about joining the network, wanted to speak to an existing franchisee. So I'd always say to them, oh, speak to our first one. And so she chatted to probably about 100 people or something on behalf of the business. And it's normally, you know, when I would try and sell a franchise to somebody, people would be a bit skeptical because it's like, oh, she's trying to sell me a franchise because it's her business and she wants to sell a franchise. But when they spoke to Julia, and Julia was just really honest about her experiences. And I said to her, make sure you give them kind of warts and all, don't just give them the good bits. Then people, I think, found her really credible, and that normally was what would seal the deal on the sale, to be honest, chatting to Julia. We still find that now, actually. I mean, a lot of franchise businesses, they'll give prospective franchisees a name or 2 of different franchisees to speak to when they're signing up to join the network. We normally give prospective franchisees the names of all of our franchisees and say, let us know which one you want to speak to, but you can speak to any of them, because we don't want you coming into this with kind of false assumptions or anything like that. And we're kind of proud of the business we've built, and I don't think there's any franchisees. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 disgruntled ones I don't know about, but I think generally they're very happy that they bought into the business. So yeah.
So having those champions within that have been able to go out and build it. So going from that, and of course you ended up going over and living in Canada, didn't you?
Yeah.
So how was that? Taking your hub had been Southwest London, South London. That first franchise seemed really far in Northwest London, and now you're going to a different continent. You're going to a different culture. How was that shift across over the years?
Well, by that point, because I moved there in 2009, and by that point, we probably had about, I don't remember exactly, probably about 60 or 70 franchises in the UK. And we'd sold Ireland, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Ecuador. No, not Ecuador. Yeah. So we'd sold quite a few overseas ones by that point. But I knew the first few franchisees, whenever we'd sell a new franchise that kind of neighboured theirs, would get really annoyed, and they'd say, well, we don't want you to sell lots of franchises, Chris, because we want you just to support us. Because obviously they kind of quite liked having me running around doing things for them. And I said, well, no, the business has got to grow, and it'll actually increase the value of your franchise if the business is a little bit bigger than it is now. So I knew when I told them I wanted to move to Canada that they would freak. So what I did was I just moved there anyway. I didn't tell anybody. And I didn't say that I was in England, but I didn't say that I was in Canada. And I would there's a 5-hour time difference with Ontario. So I would just get up every morning at like 5, 6 in the morning, get on my Skype, chat to people in England. No one knew. And I think it was after about 3 months, I made the announcement, oh, by the way, everybody, I've moved to Canada. And some of them freaked out. And I was like, look, I've been here for 3 months and you didn't even notice. So it was okay kind of doing it that way.
So that would go, on hindsight, would you do it again in such a way, or is there a refinement to that? Like, how did that kind of pan out a bit longer term? Did any of those disgruntled franchisees like boil up, or was it all fine in the end?
No, fine. I mean, really, my job, in my view, was to provide them with support, and I didn't need to be, sitting with them in England. It kind of, if anything, that approach, there were a couple of really positive things that came out of it. One was that it made me realise that it doesn't matter where you're sitting to do your job. And it meant that everyone on the head office team, we immediately got into a culture where it was like, well, none of you have to work from the office, all just work from home. So we've been doing that now for years within the business. And it also meant that when we were doing support for international franchisees, we had an extra 5 hours on every day where I could do support in the evenings and when the UK had gone to bed. So it just meant we had a really big support window compared to when we'd all been based in the UK. So like the Australians and the New Zealanders and stuff were really happy about it because they didn't have to speak to me at kind of weird times. So that was really helpful. And I think the other thing it did that was really good was it kind of cemented us as not just being a UK business that had expanded overseas. At that point, we became perceived as more of an international business, because it was like, yeah, well, we set up these offices here, we all work remotely, you know, we can set up an office anywhere we want, really. And we stopped viewing ourselves as a British business at that point. I mean, we still kind of do to a degree, but we became more of a kind of like, actually, we're not really based anywhere. We all just work from wherever we are.
So really ahead of the culture change right now. 11 years you've been able to do it. So, but that's a really interesting. So one area I want to dive into today is going international, of how that looks, is because they're quite sporadic places. Ireland, okay, kind of makes sense. Hop across a small channel of water, then going 9 hours down South Africa, 24 hours flying around to Australia and New Zealand. How did they come about, and how did that look for the business?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And in retrospect, like, I don't know if the business was, you know, if the only goal of the business was to make profits, that would not have been the way we would have done it. But when I set up the business, I was quite clear that the main objective of the business was to get as many kids as we could involved in sport. And that was what the kind of, you know, the objective was, really. And so, you know, if somebody approached me from Ecuador or Myanmar or Mongolia or whatever, and I thought that they had the same values as the rest of the team, and that they would be a good person to work with, then why would I say no? As long as I could make sure that we could, you know, cover the costs and make a slight profit getting them set up, and that they would do their best running the business. So that was the kind of the way I looked at it. So it's meant that now, you know, a lot of the countries we operate in, even kind of pandemic aside, we don't have loads and loads of kids. We've maybe got, you know, somewhere like Mongolia, I think the most we've ever had is like 150 kids coming to classes. But actually, they are 150 kids who are now doing sport who wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And so for me, that's kind of one of the objectives of the business. Looking at it from a purely kind of financial point of view, if we just wanted to make profit, then yeah, that probably wasn't the best approach. The best approach would have been to only set up in markets where, you know, we could sell at least kind of, you know, 20 franchises or something like that. But I didn't really, you know, that wasn't the goal. And the other thing was, I've always really loved traveling. And so to me, it's just been fantastic, the opportunity to go to all these different countries, meet up with the franchisees, and quite often I'll stay with them and their families, and they'll show me around the cities and stuff. And I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. So, so I think I've really enjoyed the business a lot more than I would have done if I'd said, oh, well, we ought to just launch in the US and that's it, because that's the most profitable place for us to do this, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. And that really nicely comes back onto another question. You saying when you went from the UK to Canada, you changed the approach, you became an international. It's kind of how and when have been the milestones within the business that the vision, the values, the objectives have had to kind of go? Obviously, within corporate structures, you know, you look at strategic plans, 3 to 5 years planning, and how you get through them. But how about yourself? How have you found it with strategic plans? Because in traditional settings, you'd be coming to the end of a 7th cycle or a 4th cycle of a strategic plan. But how's it gone for you and that milestone you say about the UK and Canada, you became international, but what about has it been from day one, and how's the vision, values, and changed or flexed with the business?
Yeah, so it changed a lot when we introduced the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS. I can't remember what year that was. I think it was like 2015 or something like that. At that point, it just all became very organized. And it was like, right, you know, we're going to sit down, the management team, we're going to say, you know, what is our 10-year vision and where do we want to be in 10 years' time? And we defined that by the number of kids we wanted to have coming to classes, which countries we wanted to be in, things like that. Still not profit, actually. It was all more around, you know, how many kids can we get involved in this, in doing football. And then from there, kind of, it was a reasonably easy task to scale it back to a 3-year plan, and then to scale it back to the 1-year plan. And then, you know, from there, it's quarterly plan and a weekly plan. And so now, you know, every Tuesday, we've been doing this, you know, for years now, but we'll all sit down, the head office team, and we'll say, right, you know, we'll go through all the rocks that we have, all the kind of different tasks that we need to complete that week, and say, have we done it? And if we haven't, why haven't we? And who needs help with stuff? And then every quarter, we'll set the tasks for the next quarter. And, you know, we'll prioritize and things like that, but then we'll have the weekly meetings in between the quarterly meetings to check. And actually it's an amazing way of keeping yourself on track and keeping the whole business on track and making sure that everybody knows exactly what the strategy is and that we're all pulling in the same direction. So that was quite transformative. Before that, it was all a little bit more vague, and it was a bit more kind of like, oh, I'd really love to go to Santiago. And someone's contacted us from Peru, from Chile, and she seems really lovely. So yeah, brilliant. I'll pop on a plane. It was kind of a bit more like that, but it was really good fun. But it wasn't, you know, there wasn't much business discipline around it at that point. But there was always kind of targets in terms of wanting to get more and more kids involved and grow the number of franchises and things like that.
So really rather than just seeing opportunities, it took a while to process, and that going it sounds like a 13-year journey of going from day one, 400 people, 400% oversubscribed at the pilot, to then, I like to travel, we'll go see Mongolia, great, and then really get in and build a structure. So it takes time.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to hear about that, and I'd like to ask a bit about, is kind of your skill set of how's that developed, and the identification of, right, this is my skill set, I can run with this, and then other times where you've gone, well, no, that's the appropriate time to bring that into the business, and how's that developed over time?
Yeah, so to begin with, I had two other partners when I set up the business, and I bought them both out since. But one of them, she was quite into the coaching, which was brilliant, because the other partner and I were useless. And she, it was a friend of hers who designed the first logo we had and things like that. And she got bought out at a pretty early stage. Then the other partner I had, she was ex-Accenture, she was a management consultant, she was very into kind of writing policy documents, procedures, health and safety, that kind of thing, which I can't, I'm just not my thing. I was much more into the kind of, you know, the finances, sorting out the spreadsheets, making sure it was running profitably, doing the sales side of things. And I guess the bigger picture, thinking about, you know, where do we want this business to go, and really aggressively kind of pursuing that. And I bought her out back in 2013. And then since then, I've kind of been running it on my own pretty much. Although 2 years ago, I hired a CEO, and it was the best thing I've ever done. It was fantastic. I was kind of getting a bit fatigued because, you know, as all of the people on the call will know, it's non-stop when you run your own business, and it didn't change. And, you know, I'd go on holiday and I'd constantly be on my phone, and I didn't get to spend much time with my kids and things like that, because, you know, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you if you're the one who set up a business. And it's been lovely actually having somebody else who's got a different skill set, a really good skill set. He's very operationally, he's superb, and, you know, takes no crap from anybody. And he's just turned it into more like a proper, you know, company where there's expectations of people are held to agreements and things like that. Whereas I found it quite difficult, because I think I was always, you know, if a franchisee came to me with a bit of a sob story, I'd be like, oh, that's really sad. Yeah, don't worry about paying your fees this month. And so it's a lot better now. I mean, he's not heartless, but he's a lot stricter with people, like, you know, you would have in a proper business. But I think one of the nice things has been, over the years, being able to hire qualified accountant. So it kind of, you know, outstripped my accounting skills pretty quickly, the business. So it's been really nice having someone on the team who knows what they're doing with that, and hiring somebody who actually can do marketing and graphic design. And I am the first to admit, I don't have any real specific skill set, I would say, like, and so I'm very, if I can find somebody else to come in and do it, I'm like, brilliant, come in and do it. And I'll just kind of try and hold everybody together. But yeah, it's been fantastic being able to hire other people who are much better at doing stuff than I am, to kind of help in all those different areas. And it's really strengthened the business.
And what was that like, understanding your skill set? So you've gone, that you're saying more of a generalist, but then also that go-getter. So how was that going, well, actually, I'm not the greatest at this, and giving that chunk to someone? Like, how was that process? Because often with founders, that is sometimes a challenge. Others hands up immediately. And you were saying earlier.
I love it, because you get someone in, and as long as you kind of explain properly how the business works, they are always adding a lot more value than you can be adding yourself. And I think right from the very early days, I always viewed the business as being something separate from me, that I had to look after. it's almost like kind of having another child or something, although that sounds really cliche, but it's a separate thing from me, and my job is to do my absolute best to look after it and to make it grow well. And so if, you know, I'm not the best at finance, great that I had a stab at it for long enough to get it up and running, but actually if I can hire someone in who can do a better job than me of doing that, I am so happy to do that. So no, I don't at all get upset about handing stuff off to other people. The CEO thing was a bit weird because I was like, ooh, you know, because I'd been doing it for such a long time, but actually seeing him in action, and it was difficult actually because the franchisees had been used to me doing it for such a long time, and for me being quite a soft touch compared to the person who came in, but he's doing a phenomenal job, and now I wouldn't change it for the world. He's doing an absolutely great job, and it's one of the best things I think that I've actually done since I've been running this business, is to hire him in to do that.
So that really talks about that journey going forward, and one thing I would be really interested in knowing is, compared to when you started, so what was like your biggest fear or challenge when you were starting up, and how does that compare to now? Like that, like is there such a chasm of difference, or actually is there still some actual fundamentals that still creep up even now?
It's the same thing, actually, thinking about it. I used to wake up in the middle of the night and I'd have this like panic in my stomach, and I would, like, you know, 4 a.m. I'd run over to my laptop and I'd be just like double checking all of my stuff on my spreadsheets and things like that. Now I don't get it to the same degree because I trust the person a lot more with spreadsheets. He's the guy who's doing them now than me, but I still have that feeling, because you almost feel like if you built something up yourself, it could just go away at any point. I don't know, there's still that ridiculous fear. But that's still there, yeah.
That worry, that fear coming in, that you're not fully sure. Just for everyone, what we're going to do is we'll open up for questions shortly, so please start getting them ready and we'll start discussing them and coming and getting you guys involved. But just going a bit more, is what was really exciting you said about EOS and building that up, and it was a 10-year vision. So what is the future really holding for Little Kickers? Like, now you're not a step back as much, but you've been able to reorganization, strategically, CEO, they're all steps and clearly in a process. So how's the future and everything looking for Little Kickers?
Yeah, so the main bit of the business, the bit that the CEO is tasked with, is expanding the franchise network, because obviously, you know, it's pretty obvious that that's the next thing we've got to do. Maintaining the quality of what we're doing. The bit of the business I'm really excited about and that I'm going to be focusing on more, and I think it's the whole thing about, you know, I don't want to keep doing the same thing all the time. So I'm quite into the not-for-profit side of the business. We set up a program about 3 years ago where we, every couple of months, send coaches out to Malawi, to this preschool over there with kit and equipment and things, and the coaches stay there for 10 days and they train the kids up on how to run train the staff up on how to run the program. They train the kids, leave all the kit and equipment they need, and then we pay for them to go on safari at the end, the coaches. So it's quite a popular kind of a trip. And what I'd love to do now is, we, at the moment, every child who signs up for classes gets a uniform that's made out of polyester in a single-use plastic bag, and our franchisees and parents are a bit kind of unimpressed by that because it's really not environmentally friendly. So the next big thing we're going to be doing is, and hopefully this will be launching depending on the pandemic, but end of August, beginning of September, we're going to be getting all of our uniforms made out of recycled ocean plastics. They pull the plastic out of the ocean, turn it into yarn, and make uniforms out of it. And those uniforms, they feel the same as our current uniforms, but they're a lot more environmentally friendly. And when the kids who come to our classes are finished with them, they'll get a little wristband. If they return the uniform, we launder them all at head office, and then we send coaches out. And it's actually Durban that we're looking at, a school there, where we'll be sending coaches over there with the uniforms that kind of recycled from our Little Kickers in the UK and around the world. And that's a program that we're really hoping to expand. So we're going to turn the business into, and also kind of a local merchandise that's eco-friendly and stuff, but turn the business into, we're trying to become the most eco-friendly kids sports club in the world. That's the plan. And also kind of really trying to make a bit of a difference to kids who, you know, just by merit of the fact of where they were born, don't get the same opportunities as a lot of kids do in other places. And that's kind of one of my big bugbears. So I think that's one of the things that we're going to be focusing on quite a lot in the future.
That sounds brilliant. That expansion into those, and it's changing those visions and values. And it sounds fantastic where you can get sent on safari, but I'm a rugby coach, so you closed down my opportunity to go there, so I can't come involved with that one. But you just touched on something there around COVID, and I don't want to dive into that. How has it been? Because, like you're saying, I know we haven't really talked about it too much, but 330 franchises across the world in 32 countries. Everyone's moving at a different pace, and of course, you're saying you've kind of spread out naturally. It's just gone opportunity. But how has this last, realistically, now coming up to 12 months, maybe even 18 months? How's it been, and what's kind of the effect on franchisees, which is very much around a social interaction and kind of learning and group activities?
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the first things to be stopped from running in a lot of different countries around the world. And we decided pretty early on in the pandemic. I mean, we're fortunate, or our franchisees as well are fortunate insofar as none of them really have offices. So they don't have to pay rent. They have very little fixed costs. It's all variable costs. So, you know, they rent halls to run the classes in. If they don't run the classes, then they don't rent the halls. So that's that cost gone. The second biggest cost they have is staff wages. And we managed to kind of get, in a lot of the developed countries, there was some kind of furlough scheme set up or whatever. So that was kind of quite helpful. So most of the franchisees didn't operate for months on end, but you know, they didn't have a huge amount of outgoing. So it's almost like they just turned the business off, shut it down. And what we decided from a head office perspective was the main thing that we could do that would help the franchisees was to just keep the brand out there on social channels to make sure that people didn't forget about it. So we entered loads of awards and won quite a few awards last year, which was weird because we were locked down for most of the year. And we made a load of videos. And it was actually, I was in lockdown in Toronto, and my son is now nearly 21, and he's been coaching for us for years. So I got him to, I was out in the back garden with the iPhone filming him doing kind of videos for kids around the world to do in their sitting rooms, and then got my daughter involved, and I had to dress up in the lion outfit, the mascot, and get involved as well. But we did a load of videos, and we got coaches to do videos on social channels and things like that. So we just tried to keep the brand out there in the public's mind over the last year. Then we managed to open up in the UK for about the UK is by far our biggest market. We managed to open up there for 3 months last summer. And luckily we had an incredibly busy 3 months. So the money that the franchisees made then, for most of them, it kind of has tided them over until a couple of weeks ago when we started up again. And we're actually now, I just found out earlier today, actually, we've got 32,000 kids coming to classes in the UK alone at the moment, which is a record. So I think we've seen post-COVID, touch wood, the business is kind of bouncing back. There's huge demand for what we're doing. And even you know, places like New Zealand, Australia, they're up 45% in terms of the number of kids they've got coming to classes as compared to where they were this time last year. So I think we're going to see a big resurgence when everything does kind of calm down in the different countries around the world.
Yeah. So as a business, and guys, I'm just about to come with you a question, so please be ready. Just as that, how's that? Is it exciting? Is it like, because 45% is a massive jump in regards to numbers, it looks great for you, but are you expecting a bit of a growth in franchises, or is it more like, and what does that mean for you and the kind of planning for the business?
In terms of the franchises, we actually sold a record number of franchises in the UK last year, which doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it. But we found the same thing after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. I think if a lot of people lose their jobs, they suddenly become nervous about trying to find other jobs where they're working for big companies. They want to do something where, you know, they are in charge of their own destiny. So franchising becomes quite appealing at that point. So we got a load of new franchisees last year. But I think the pandemic's frightened me because, you know, and I think probably a lot of other people will be feeling the same way, but I thought it was going to be 3 months, and then it was like, oh, actually no, we're shutting down again. Oh, we're shutting down again. And I'm flying back to Ontario to see my kids a week on Saturday. They went into another lockdown there a couple of weeks ago, but it's a total stay-at-home order, and they've now extended it until the end of May. So I don't feel like you can feel you're out of the woods anywhere at the moment, which is it's really unsettling. And I'm sure everyone else has the same thing, where you've got this gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach, where you just think, when's it actually going to be over? But, you know, fingers crossed, the UK is almost out of the woods.
Brilliant. Well, no, that definitely, obviously new challenges going from there, and how different countries are responding, especially when you're across, literally, we were saying every inhabitable continent you're on. So of course you're seeing different things moving. But thanks so much for talking. And what I'm going to now do is open some questions up to the floor. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, or if you want to just raise your hand and come off mute and ask a question, please do, and we'll go from there. Oh, so got our first one in. So if you could just expand on how you handle outsourcing or hiring people to take over certain aspects of the business in the early days from the perspective and able to pay them. So I know you talked about you had 2 co-founders, different skill sets, but when were those initial first hires happening and how did that expand and go from there? And kind of what time did it happen?
Yeah, so the first person we hired, I hired someone to do payroll because I didn't know how to do it myself, and I've been paying a company to do it. And I thought, actually, if I hire somebody who can do payroll and bookkeeping and things like that, I'm kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And so that was pretty early on. That was maybe after about 6 months or so we got her, but she was only part-time. Like everybody was part-time for the first few years. And then I hired, it was actually my aunt, and she came on board just to help out with managing franchises, and she kind of took over the operations manager job. But, you know, I didn't pay her a huge amount of money. She was just doing a job she didn't really like before, and she's really smart. So I just thought, actually, if I can pay you the same as you were getting in your old job, will you come and do this job for me? But yeah, it was just as the business grew and the revenues grew, I've never been massively focused on taking out a huge amount of profit from the business. So I've actually been on the same salary now, which is less than I made at JP Morgan at the end of my time there. But I'm on the same salary now for like 5 or 6 plus years. And I just tend to plow everything in the business. I take what I need to live on, but I'm not one of these entrepreneurs who just kind of takes as much as they can out. And I haven't right from the start. I've always kind of thought that it was sensible to invest in the business, and hiring other people to do the bits of the work that I wasn't particularly good at myself was a real priority. So yeah, as the business grew and revenue became, you know, more available, that's what I would spend it on, hiring people.
Brilliant. Zachary, let us know if that's answered your question. Morgan's got one. It's really interesting. If you know, you were mentioning around how the new CEOs come in and they've kind of taken on your old role. How's that been? Do you feel like there's less control, or is it more like a partnership, or how's that kind of manifested itself within the business?
He manages me brilliantly. he's to begin with, I was a bit nervous about it, but I really respect him as a person. He was actually CEO of the Prince's Trust before he came to us, and he's just a really good person with really solid values. And I have complete faith in what he does for the business. And he's very good at checking with me. So we probably speak, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 times a week, if not more. Quite often for an hour at a time. So there's not much that goes on in the business that I don't know about. I think to begin with, I was a bit like, oh, you know, is he doing a good enough job? And I hope he's not annoying people. But no, and he's absolutely fantastic. And I think it's just over time. I mean, it's been 2 years now. The first year was quite tricky, giving up that control. But actually now I feel completely, you know, happy with the situation. I'm really glad that I've got him in.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, follow up for myself there. How was it when you were writing up the job spec of a CEO and the hiring? Did you recognize what was on paper, or because that's often when you do a job spec in any life, but something that's been your life for say 15 years? How was that writing up the job spec for the CEO?
Yeah, it was quite difficult. I actually got the chief operating officer to help me with it, because I was like, what do I actually do, Nick? And he helped me write it. And it was kind of also, you know, what do you think somebody who does this role should be doing? How would you like them to work with you? So I kind of cheated a bit on that and got someone else to help me with it.
The luxuries of running the business and being the founder and the owner. Guys, please keep on your questions coming in on the chat. I've just got one. I know you mentioned earlier you had your son who's been involved as a coach and everything. How's that then? Of course, you really keep it as a bit of a family business there. You now bring the next generation in. And how's that working, kind of interacting with him as an employee? And also you mentioned around your aunt as well.
Yeah. I love working with my son. He's great, and he's so enthusiastic, and he gets really excited, and he loves kids, and yeah, he's fantastic. And my daughter does some of our social media stuff. She doesn't really like children very much, and I don't think she'd be a great coach. She'd be really mean to them, I think. But she's really good at the social media side of things. My aunt, it was good, really good working with her, because she'd ring me up and say, I think you're getting a bit too big for your boots and stuff like this. So whenever I was like, yeah, I'm running this great company, she kind of bring me back down to earth quite quickly. It kind of got to the point though, I had quite a few family and friends working with me, and it became quite difficult because there's an expectation that you will treat them differently from other people. And even if they don't put that expectation out there, you kind of do it anyway. And I think it's difficult for other people on the team if you've got a bunch of family and friends working with you. So now I actually don't have, just trying to think if I do, but no, I don't have any of my family at all. I mean, my brother had the franchise, right? There's a whole load of my family have been involved, but no one is involved anymore. And I'm kind of glad, because it's just, you can't help but treat them a bit differently, and they do expect to get special favors as well, which is fair enough. But I kind of, it's actually Alan, the CEO, when he came in, he cleared the decks of people who expected to get kind of preferential treatment because they've been around for a long time or whatever, and just said, look, now everyone's being treated the same, which is right. That's how it should be.
So really that kind of formalizing of processes that was not your way previously, it's kind of been that evolution through, must have been an interesting thing to view. But just going on that and that different perspectives, I think it's a really interesting question. Of course, being in so many countries, and how's it been dealing with so many different cultures? And I know you're saying around the ethos and the values and the vision you see is integral, but that initial one, you saw an opportunity with when someone said, take this Brazil, different language, but there's got to be some language, potential culture. How's that?
Yeah, there's been some challenges around it. I've been surprised actually at how most countries, the model just transfers across quite well. We always make the first franchisee in a new country run a pilot for 6 months, and we work really closely with them over that period to make sure that they're making the little tweaks that they need to make to the program and things like that, just to make sure it runs properly. The biggest challenge has actually been, we were so excited to go into China and India, and after a while we were just like, God, people just don't seem to want to send their kids to our classes, and we couldn't work it out. We chatted to the franchisees in those countries and some of the customers, and they said, what it is that in those countries at the moment, there's not really that many programs like this. Was a few years ago. There's not really that many programs like this, and most people only want to send their kids to do classes if it's going to actually teach them something or help them in some way with their future development. Sport's not counted as being particularly important. So what we had to do at that point was say, right, obviously the kids are learning loads at our classes, not just sport, colours, numbers, socialisation, parts of the body, everything else. So what we did at that point was developed almost a roadmap that would show parents exactly what the children were learning at our classes. And every 3 months, each child now is working towards a different badge that they get, and they can kind of iron them onto their uniform, and the kids get really excited about the badges. But with the parents, the badges are all, it's either leadership skills or passing, or it could be a physical thing or a kind of, psychological / early learning thing. And the parents then know, we make a big song and dance about making sure the parents are aware of exactly what the children are learning every 3 months. So that was something, and the programs are working better now in those countries. But that was something that was quite difficult, because we were the first ones to go into a lot of these markets where we operate, and people were just like, why would you send your kids to football classes when they're only 2 years old? And it was kind of breaking through that. And I think quite often it's easier to be the one who comes second into those markets than the first one to be in them, trying to kind of smash down the barriers.
So just, Nazir, I'll come on to your question in a moment, but just going a bit more onto that, how's that been, that evolution of understanding the user, obviously being the child involved, and then the customer who is not actually your paying customer, but ultimately is receiving your product with the parents, and then your franchise. How have you seen or developed that of understanding your user, customer, and your customer groups that you have and kind of involved with? How's that been?
I think the first kind of foremost always in our minds is that the kids should just have a fantastic time, and they need to be learning things, but the main focus is how can we make this as fun an experience as possible for the kids. Because obviously if the kids don't enjoy it, they're not going to want to come to the classes. And then with the parents, it tends to be more, most parents, if they can see that their child's having great fun, then they're happy to kind of carry on doing that activity. But I think for them, it was more making sure that they understood the educational aspects of what we were doing, and that it wasn't just kids running around having fun. It was actually they were learning a load of things as well. So that was kind of the kind of secondary thing there. And then you were asking about franchisees.
Yeah, just more of how, like going back to Julia, the first one of giving you feedback and understanding what they wanted and how much that potentially affected the user and customer group beyond them because of how the model's set up.
Yeah, so we talk a lot with our franchisees and have really good communications with them, because they are the ones who every day are kind of serving the customers and seeing what competitors are doing and things like that. So they report back to us, and we have forums and we have conferences and we have specific groups for focusing on marketing, on coaching and things like that. But we're constantly trying to get feedback from the franchisees, because all of the good ideas we have now pretty much are ones that we hear from franchisees based on what they're seeing in the marketplace. So I think as long as we continue listening to the franchisees and we do everything we can to make their lives as easy as possible in terms of the operational running of the business, then in theory, the business should just go from strength to strength. I can't really see how it would not if we keep listening to them. At least
yeah. But okay, brilliant. So I think that brings nicely on that kind of that learning process from the franchises going. And Nazir wants to know is what's maybe the one thing or that you've learned to always do since becoming a business owner? Is there anything you're like that's really actually that is one thing I'll stand by, and that's what I've learned?
It's actually so boring, but it's legal stuff. Like, don't try and cut any corners. Don't try and cut any corners with trademark registration, intellectual property, contracts. I always get them done by lawyers, because it's every now and again you have to rely on the contract if things go south with a franchisee, and you need to know that the contract that you've got is really good and enforceable, because otherwise it gets very messy and very expensive. So it's kind of the legal stuff.
And then on the flip side of what is the one thing you've learned actually that's just been cast aside, you're like, nope, shouldn't be doing that, and kind of maybe born out of any mistakes or kind of challenges you've got to overcome?
I am not really one for too much formality, and like everyone's, oh, you don't have an assistant, and it's like, no, because I just do all the stuff myself. Like, no one has an assistant. We'll just get on with it. We book our own flights, we book our own hotels. It's fine. I'm not really one. I don't care about status and needing to show people, that the people within the business are important and stuff like that. Not at all. Like, we're just very, very flat hierarchy. Everyone chats to everybody else. We just get on with it. And I think I kind of, coming out of banking, when I set up Little Kickers, I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, and then I'll hire my first PA after I've been doing it for 6 months and they can type my letters for me. It's like, no, can't afford it, and don't really need it.
So really understanding what you need and also fitting it in with the vision of like the company, more of a learn to do rather than a learn again. So go from there. Guys, we're going to be wrapping up soon. Does anyone have any other questions? This is what you asked for. You asked to speak to someone who's been through, seen the wars. So what advice would you give to new business owners who are starting out?
I think don't expect it to be really easy all the time. It's like a roller coaster. Everyone I know who has, I know a lot of people who've got their own businesses, they always talk about this roller coaster ride. And I thought after, the first couple of years it would calm down and stop, but it hasn't. It's still going on. And I actually quite enjoy it. But I think it's, some days you just think, oh my God, it's a fantastic day ever. I absolutely love this business. I'm so happy. And then the next day you just like, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I still doing? This is just awful. But everyone I know has that. And I think the longer you're kind of doing it, the more you know to expect that to happen. And the more when you have the kind of, even if the bad days last for a week, you know that they will end and things will seem a bit brighter. And so I think it's just, don't give up, hang on in there. It's going to be a roller coaster, most likely. But as long as you kind of hang on and you're the one still hanging on at the end of the ride, you're sorted.
Brilliant. Okay. We've got. If you had to start this business or any other today in 2021, how would you go about it? What is there something you do, or so how would you go about it, firstly, and kind of that foremost, and then we'll come on to the second bit, which is more around what would you potentially do differently?
The how to go about, I think it's a big question, because obviously kind of, the logistics of it, you're kind of registering your business, registering domain, checking out trademarks, making sure that that the financial model works, creating your branding. It's just like I'm not sure I can do justice to that question in the time that we have, because it's quite a big question. I think I've learned a lot from doing the business, from doing Little Kickers, so I'd go about it hopefully a lot more efficiently than I went about that. A lot of the time just guesswork, and then realizing I'd done it wrong and having to redo it. But yeah, I'm not sure I can give a better answer.
I think going with that though, of an area, you said earlier in the early days, you just kind of went with it, and kind of, do you think that was something you'd still put as a high priority? Like you're saying about having all the plans and everything and building legal, but how much of that had you actually done before you went out and did the pilot, and like getting that level of validation? Kind of, did you find that as a balance, or?
Yeah, no, I hadn't really done any of that kind of stuff before, to be honest. I think the thing that's difficult that I noticed at the beginning was I didn't really trust my instincts that much, and I'm very comfortable with taking risks, because as long as I'm okay with the outcome, as long as the worst case scenario, this is going to happen, and if I think actually that's not that bad, it's worth giving it a go, then I'm very happy doing that. I think to begin with I was a lot more risk averse, and that's kind of counterintuitive, because really that's the point when you need to be prepared to take the risks, I guess. So I think I'd probably, if I set up another business now, I would try and be comfortable with more risk at the beginning and taking more chances to see what would work, rather than just, at the time when I set up Little Kickers, I was pretty cautious about everything.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Any last question? That's the last call now. Otherwise, I'll be saying thank you to Christine for her time this afternoon. Right. Okay. Guys, what I'm going to say there, Christine, thank you so much. It's been fantastic having you and you sharing your story and talking about those challenges and the milestones and everything you've been able to tell us and everyone here today. So thank you very much. And yeah, best of luck with everything in the future.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Howard, for inviting me along. It's been really, really good fun. I've loved chatting to you, and best of luck to everyone else on the call. I'm really excited to kind of see where things go with the businesses. I'm really hoping to get a little bit more involved with the program at some point, if that's a possibility. So, yeah, thank
Definitely.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.